Created equal or made equal? Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. No one ever made an ounce of earth. That's the very first thing I ever said in an economics classroom because it's the first line of the economics textbook authored by Fred Gothiel. So, who made the earth? Well, to Christians, that answer is very simple. God made it. In the book, How Then Should We Work?, Hugh Welchel writes, God made something of nothing. Our job is to make something of something. You see, it's really clear to Christians. God creates, humans discover. Subtitle, Individual or Group. Charles Lipson is the author of a March 5 Wall Street Journal article referencing the idea that the current American presidential administration is trying to play God by making people equal. His article is titled, Equity is a Mandate to Discriminate, and the subtitle is, The New Buzzword Tries to Hide the Aim of Throwing Out the American Principle of Equality under the Law. Quote, here's from his article, quote, just to be clear, Senator Tom Cotton asked the HUD nominee Marcia Fudge, it sounds like racial equity means treating people differently based on their race. Is that correct? Mrs. Fudge responded, no, not based on race, but it could be based on economics. It could be based on the history of discrimination that has existed for a long time. Ms. Fudge's candid response tracks that of Vice President Kamala Harris's tweet and video posted before the election and viewed some 6.4 million times. Quote, there's a big difference between equality and equity, end quote. Continuing to read from Charles Lipson's article, Ms. Harris and Ms. Fudge are right. There is a big difference. It's a difference between equal treatment and equal outcomes. Equality means equal treatment, unbiased competition, and impartially judged outcomes. Equity means equal outcomes, achieved if necessary by unequal treatment, biased competition, and preferential judging. Last paragraph from Mr. Lipson. Those who push for equity have hidden these crucial differences for a reason. They aren't merely unpopular. They challenge America's bedrock principle that people should be treated equally and judged as individuals, not as members of groups. Thank you, Mr. Lipson. Hey, people should be free is the first of the 10 biblical commandments of economics in the book titled Biblical Economic Policy that I authored recently with Sergei Seidamatov. That freedom is being challenged by the statements made by Kamala Harris and Marcia Fudge. Let's contemplate on that for a moment. Why do Christian economists place so much emphasis on the individual, and secular economists place so much emphasis on the group? Clearly, our belief system is based in the philosophy that only individuals can accept the author of redemption through the invitation of Christ. Subtitle, Who is the Creator? Christians believe God creates. Secularists believe humans create. In his first week in office, President Joe Biden signed an executive order that biological men can compete against women in athletic contests. Christians believe that God created men and women. President Biden believes humans choose to be men or women, thus humans are the creators of gender. I drive by Midlothian High School every day, where a marble diagram in the center of the floor reads, quote, creating a better world, one student at a time, end quote. That's not exactly the Christian worldview. We believe God creates, humans discover. Baylor University had an advertising sign in Dallas recently that read, quote, we create information, end quote. The sign was changed soon after it was posted. I have to wonder if they heard from their religion department about who creates. Christians believe that God creates, humans discover his creation. Now, sidetrack here for a moment. We often host some number of our 7 grandchildren for dinner. Years ago, when some of them wanted to get up from dinner, I thought too soon, I blurted out, we pray, we eat, we talk. We pray, we eat, we talk. It's become one of the rules at Grandma's house. And actually, Will Ferrell suggests something like this in his book, The Boy Crisis. At dinner last night, we were talking about marriage, and our 4-year-old grandson stated seriously, Grandma, that's not how it works. Interesting. that a 4-year-old may know more about how the world works than our current presidential administration. Subtitle, Behavior. I spent some time in New Mexico, and a few years ago, I was watching the local Albuquerque TV station when they were reporting about how the college scholarships had been awarded, and a student who earned the GED degree later was not given a scholarship. The student looked in the camera and stated sincerely, "I should not be discriminated against because of the choice I made." To quote our 4-year-old grandson, that's not how the world works. We are discriminated against because of our behavior. Our Dallas Cowboys were discriminated against 10 times this season because of their behavior. They lost the game. My job as a college professor is to discriminate against students because of their academic behavior. This is how the world works. And frankly, that's why there's 2.2 billion Christians in the world, because our worldview fits reality. In explaining economic inequality as behavior, one of my favorite economists, Thomas Sowell, writes in his book, Discrimination and Disparities, the labor force participation rate of married black males has been higher than the labor force participation of white males who never married. Moreover, this has been true for more than 20 consecutive years. People who marry have different economic behavior than those who don't marry. I unpack more details on this in my podcast number 68, Poor by Choice. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator. They are created equal, then given choice about how to lead their lives. Those choices have consequences. According to Thomas Sowell in his book, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, everyone in poverty has made one of 3 choices. Number 1, dropped out of high school. Or number 2, got pregnant without being married. Or number 3, failed to hold a job for 18 months. We are created with different talents and skills. I can't play basketball like LeBron James, nor can I read a speech as effectively as President Obama. Both of those guys have earned more economic rewards than I have. Notice the verb earned. In a competitive environment, people get rich by making consumer surplus. I don't have time to unpack that today, but I've explained it in podcast number 54, titled Equal is Not Fair. More from Thomas Sowell, because I just love this guy. Quote, as a young scholar and the first man to receive a PhD from Harvard, W.E.B. Du Bois posed the question as to what would happen if all white people were to lose their racial prejudices overnight. He said that it would make little difference in the economic situation of most blacks, although some few would be promoted and some few would get new places as a result of an end of racial discrimination. Nevertheless, the mass would remain as they are until the younger generation began to try harder and the race lost the omnipresent excuse for failure, which is prejudice. That's a double end quote because I was quoting W.E.B. Du Bois within Thomas Sowell's book, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. Subtitle, Unequal is Natural. Look, the government has no money. It only redistributes it. It's clear in economics that a country can have policies that grow the pie or that divide the pie. Record low black unemployment was achieved in the Trump administration by growing the pie. The record for the slowest economic recovery in modern history was achieved by President Obama's policies that divided the pie. I once redistributed grades from a student who wrote a good article on redistribution. I gave her the full 10 points and then gave 3 to one student who didn't participate, 3 to another student who didn't participate, because that's what she argued for in her paper. She accused me of theft of her private property. Think about it. She favors redistribution, but she does not favor me redistributing her grade. Back to Thomas Sowell, but this is a different book. Discrimination and Disparities is the name of this book. He writes, one can read reams of arguments that statistical disparities imply biased treatment without finding a single empirical example of the even distribution of social groups in any endeavor, in any country, or in any period of history, end quote. Sowell goes on to write, quote, we should not be surprised if economic or social advances are not evenly or randomly distributed among individuals, groups, institutions, or nations at any given time, end quote. Oh, and for those of you who like Vice President Harris, who wants to make the world more fair, please work on this one. Also a quote from Thomas Sowell. Quote, black faculty members have higher incomes than their equally qualified white counterparts, end quote. I am an equally qualified white counterpart who is underpaid according to Professor Sowell. Subtitle, earned or distributed. Most income is not distributed at all, either justly or unjustly. Most income in a market economy is earned, as I mentioned earlier, directly by providing something that someone else wants and values enough to pay for it. We call it producer and consumer surplus in economics. Look, in 30 years as a college professor, I have offered to more than 5,000 students to redistribute their grades to a poorer performing student. As of today, none have accepted. You know why? It's because they have a fallen nature. They want others' grades redistributed to them, but they don't want their grade redistributed to somebody else. Vice President Harris wants to create equity, but she didn't do it during her run for presidency. Have you thought about that? If she wants economic goods distributed equally, why didn't she distribute her votes to other candidates equally? This is such a hypocritical game. They want to accumulate more votes so they can create a more equal world. Well, then how do they justify accepting the power of the office in the first place? Strange when the most powerful woman in the world calls for redistribution of power. Have you noticed? It's always the most powerful person who claims they want to redistribute goods. I cover this in more detail in podcast number 6, titled Jesus Distributed the Gospel Unequally. I'm humored when somebody like Pope Francis, the most powerful religious leader in the world, states, quote, inequality is a sin, end quote. Think about it. Subtopic, moving in the right direction. The Christian worldview seeks improvement, not perfection. That's more fully explained in podcast number 34, titled No Utopia. First, most complaints about income inequality are violations of the 10th commandment against covetousness. I explain that in more detail in podcast number 17 called Don't Covet. How equal would you want income to be distributed? In economics, we study income in terms of quintiles, fifths, right? It starts with the top fifth, making 60 times as much as the bottom. But after taxes are extracted from the top quintile and awarded as benefits to the bottom quintile, it's more like 16x. Just how equal do these socialists want our society to be? So equal that elected officials have no power? In his little book, The American Dream is Not Dead, Michael Strain explains how we are getting better. Here's a fact. 86% of people raised in the bottom quintile out-earn their parents. Wow. I'll say it again. 86% of people raised in the bottom quintile out-earn their parents. We're getting better. Adults raised in the bottom quintile at the age of 40 out-earn their parents by 2.5 times. This is adjusted for inflation. And across all quintiles, adults today have higher family incomes than their parents did. I'll return to Thomas Sowell again. A University of Michigan study that followed a given set of working Americans from 1975 to 1991 found that only 1% of Americans stayed in the bottom quintile during all of the years of the study. While the quintile data deserves more unpacking than I have time for today, consider this conclusion. 1% of the American population could be considered terminally poor. 1%. What do you want it to be? Let me close with Mr. Lipson, who wrote the article in the Wall Street Journal. He closes his article by asking the following question, quote, since the ultimate goal is achieving equal outcomes, isn't equity just a new brand name for the oldest program of achieving equal outcomes? It's called socialism. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist, where our slogan is, fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.